There are so many beautiful flowers out there that it's easy to get swept away by the dahlias and the lilies and the roses and to completely forget that your goal is to make a bouquet. And to make a bouquet, you need some bulk, you need some filler. So today we are talking all about filler flowers, the thing that really makes the bouquet come together, because you need a lot more than just that one fun punch. It's common advice for flower farmers to grow 50% filler to your 50% actual flowers. And when I say filler, what I mean is the greenery, those tiny little flower bits that you don't really use for the flowers, but to create the shape and the bulk of the bouquet. You don't realize how important these pieces are until you don't have them. And then you put your flowers together and it doesn't look right. So I am joined with Nicole from Flower Hill Farm, and we are gonna go over some of our favorites that we use on our farms, as well as our super exciting new experiments that we have coming up for this year.
Hey guys, it's Nicole from Flower Hill Farm, and I'm growing cut flowers and some vegetables in upstate New York, Zone 4B. We have a 20-acre property here, but I'm only growing on a few of those acres. I'm establishing some perennials and doing a lot of annuals, and one of my favorite things to grow are filler flowers, and I'm expanding my fillers this year, and I can't wait to share some of my favorite varieties with you.
I am absolutely obsessed with Amaranth, as I'm sure you guys all know. I will not shut up about how much I think it is the absolute perfect flower. Here on the farm, I use this as a focal because I love it. And I am beyond excited about the idea of having just big bunches of only Amaranth, both fresh and dried throughout the entire season. I am planting a lot of Amaranth. But even though I think it's a great focal, great on its own, more than that, it is a great filler. And I use it as a filler in multiple ways. First of all, I use it when it's really young, when it doesn't have like the flower plume look to it. It's more just leaves. I cut it, you know, it's a nice big stem, punchy, upright greenery, and it looks amazing. I especially like my wild weed Amaranth in the spring because it's so early and the green is so rich on it. I find that it makes, you know, a really big impact in the bouquets early on in the season when I don't necessarily have a lot of filler options. And then on the backside of the season, in the fall, I absolutely love Hot Biscuit for the brown shades that the flower has. It is such a unique coloring. It brings those fall rusty tones, you know, blends so nicely with sunflowers. Even though I use it throughout the year, big, impactful, I find that it actually can function really nicely to, you know, fill up a bouquet, make some bulk, and, you know, tone down some of those more jewel tones into the fall palettes that so many people are looking for. So don't disregard Amaranth as a filler, both early on when it's just leaves and then later on when it has the seed flowers.
One of my favorite things that I used in 2020 was basil. The three that I grew for cut flowers were Mrs. Burns Citrus Lemon Basil, Cinnamon Basil, which was actually a request from one of my customers who had gotten a bouquet with that cinnamon basil in it before, and she told me it was heavenly, so I went ahead, got the seeds, started to grow it, and she was right. Wow, cinnamon basil was super impressive. And the third one that I grew was a dark opal basil, which was a dark purple, beautiful. People absolutely loved having that deep, deep purple in the bouquets. Now, basil has a tendency to wilt if it's not handled properly. In order to prevent the wilting in my bouquets, I harvested it at least 24 hours before I needed it, and I let it sit in water. If the basil was going to wilt, it would within that 24-hour period. Also, make sure you keep basil out of the refrigerator. It does not like those cold temperatures.
I'm the same as Nicole. Almost every single bouquet that leaves my hands has basil in it. It is actually the majority of the filler that we use on the farm. But when I think of basil, I actually think of an entire family of greenery and filler of just herbs in general. Here on the farm, herbs are my main fillers. You know, I use the basil, love it. I use the purple cinnamon basil, and then I use a green basil. And this last year, because I was drowning in just the classic Genovese basil, I actually used a lot of that on the farm, and it was a great filler too. But the filler that I was probably the most excited about this last season was actually cilantro. Cilantro is a little bit of a pain here on the farm because it goes to seed so quickly. And once it goes to seed, you can't really sell it as a herb for, you know, culinary eating. But it was incredible as a filler. It had these beautiful, delicate, kind of pinky, purplish flowers on this like really frilly greenery. You know, it stopped being this dense leaf and turned into this beautiful, light, frilly accent. And then if I didn't pick it when it was the flowers and I let it go to seed, you know, it had this like spray of cilantro seeds and it looked incredible. It was very, very, very romantic and soft and fun. And I loved having lots of it because I grow lots of the cilantro here on the farm for eating. I also absolutely adored parsley flowers this last season. My flat parsley, I messed up somehow. In summer, it went to seed, but it ended up being this amazing filler. It had a look almost like Queen Anne's lace, which makes sense because it is part of that same family, but it was yellow. And another filler that I like to use that's super common is dill, but I find sometimes the dill scent is a little too pungent in you know, if I want to use a mass of it in a bouquet, a little bit too pickly to want to use more than 1 or 2 stems of it. But the parsley, same look as those dill flowers with the yellow, you know, and the bright greens, but very, very faint fragrance on it. You know, it smelled like parsley, and parsley, you know, it's not overwhelming. I don't know that I will have it in the future because normally parsley shouldn't go to seed in the summer, but I took advantage of it when I could. I also use a lot of mint here on the farm. Mint, as you may know, grows like a weed. It can spread everywhere, and I love that about it because it means that I can have armfuls of it to pick, to use in my bouquets, and the smell. I have a mixed patch, lots of different varieties, and I love the way the different colors, the different textures contrast, and they're just incredible to have in the bouquets. One of the earliest fillers that I had available was actually catmint, catnip. It grows wild here, and it bloomed very, very early. It bloomed in the end of May, beginning of June, and I had armfuls of it. And what an incredible filler. It lasted like 2 or 3 weeks in the vase. The only downside is my cats really liked it. So sometimes those bouquets, when they came in, got a little attacked by the cats, but you know, worth it for this beautiful, fragrant, and easy to grow bulk in a bouquet. So don't disregard any herbs. Almost every single herb will make an excellent source of filler for your bouquets.
One of the first fillers that I started to use here on the farm was the Greenery of the COSMO flower. Now, I did this out of necessity because I was growing a lot of dahlias and a lot of gladiolas, and I did not plant enough filler in order to make those bouquets work. So what I did have were Cosmos that were not blooming yet. So I looked it up, did some research. Sure enough, Cosmo's Greenery will hold up in a bouquet. It has that light, airy texture, just a really cool look about it, and it fills up a lot of space in a bouquet. So that's definitely something that I will plan on. Plus, the Cosmos flower, although gorgeous, really only has a 4-day vase life. And by cutting that central stem and using it as filler in your bouquet, you're essentially pinching the flower. So that COSMO plant that you left behind will now start to branch out, leaving you with either more greenery or more beautiful blooms.
Well, most of the filler that I use here on the farm is more of a greenery. I also really like to have some smaller, delicate flowers to bulk up bouquets when I can remember to plant them. 3 of my favorite here on the farm is baby's breath. I don't have the perennial baby's breath, and I also find, you know, it looks a little bit 80s. I've seen it used in ways that I love, but the one that I grow here personally is annual baby's breath, and it's called Covent Market, and it's very fleshy. It doesn't look dried out in the way the perennial baby's breath does, and it also grows very fast. So it's very quick from seed to cut, which I like. The only issue with it is you have to remember to keep planting it. You ideally want to plant a small patch every week so that you have a fresh patch to pick from every week. I usually forget, and then I only get about a month of it before it fizzles out. Another early spring small flower cluster that I absolutely love is feverfew. There is so many different varieties. I have a wild one that just grows in my garden, and that's what I've been picking off. So it's just a single, but it, you know, they're so classic and they're so pretty, and it fills up a huge amount of space, which is, you know, essentially what you're looking for with the filler. But it also, you know, it adds such a classic garden look. There also is doubles. In going into the future, I'd like to get my hands on some of these double seeds that look incredible and look a little bit more formal, which I think would be fun to play with. And then finally, into summer, into fall, one of my absolute favorites is rudbeckia called trilobia, and it's just these tiny little yellow daisies. They're so pretty, but they're so easy to pick. You know, you pick one branch, it's this big cluster, and it just fills up the bouquet. I set it a little bit lower, and so it's just this like cloud of sunshine that all the focal flowers sit up above, and it can take one branch of it can take a bouquet that looks like drab and empty and just cheery sunshine filled to the brim. So I love it, and it grows very, very easy and very tall. So it's probably one of my favorite things that I grow on the farm.
Queen Anne's lace was one of my earliest fillers that I used here on the farm, and I didn't even have to grow it because it grew here naturally. So I didn't seed this plant. This is something that is just existing here on my farm, and it's fairly recognizable. It's also known as a wild carrot. You can tell what it's going to be just by the very first green that pops up out of the ground. So if I saw a Queen Anne's lace plant starting to emerge from the soil, I left it there because I knew I was going to be using that plant for filler later on in the season. You could also get a Dara or an Ami, which is a false Queen Anne's lace. I do grow that from seed, and it's just as gorgeous. You can tell the difference though because the Queen Anne's lace actually has a central black dot or a deep red dot right in the middle of it, and that's actually how the Queen Anne's lace plant got its name. So Queen Anne herself was a huge fan of lace, and she made it, and that speck, that dark spot in the middle of the flower, that represents a pinprick that Queen Anne gave herself while making lace.
Another category of fillers that I grow and use would be kind of, I'd call it seed pods. One of the classics that people recommend to grow, lots of farmers buy it and grow it, is cress. And you don't grow it for the little tiny flowers. You grow it to set seeds and then cut it and use it with the seed pods. And you know, it looks incredible. All the structural shape to it. I really like the seed pods, but the cress is kind of like the baby's breath. You have to remember to keep planting it. I get too scattered, and at this point I've bought it and I've never planted it before. But in the spring, there's so many veggies that I plant that very quickly go to seed. And after they go to seed, I let them set their seed pods, and then I cut them and I use them as cut flowers. Pretty much all of my brassicas, so like my mustards and even like my radishes, stuff like that, they go to seed super fast, and within 2 months I have seed pods that I'm cutting off of them, and then I can, pick from what I have, just weedy in my vegetable garden, and I can find the different shapes. Some are bigger pods, some are, more vertical and upright. I really like the mustards for being very upright. And then the colors can be very different. I can get some purpley shades, some green shades. So you would be surprised what you can scavenge out there, wild in the fields, in your gardens, that you maybe didn't consider in this kind of seed pod category without even planting it for yourself. I also love grasses. Up to this point, I haven't really had very many grasses that I've intentionally grown, but I can always find some around the farm. I love the movement and the shape that they can add to a bouquet. But going forward, I'm growing some annual grasses, and I feel like they're gonna add a lot more bulk. I also am putting in a lot of perennial grasses. I have 4 different varieties of miscanthus grasses, which are perennial and put on these really beautiful grass plumes in the late summer, early fall, that I'll be able to use fresh. What a perfect pairing with my amaranths and my sunflowers for those fall bouquets. But I'll also be able to cut them and use them dried. And I've recently heard of people talking about using dried flowers with fresh flowers in the spring when maybe, some of your fillers are a little bit more limited. What people do is they shorten the dried stems, right? So so when they go into the vase, the dried stems are sitting up out of the water. They're not getting all like rotten and melting in the water. So you can kind of save your grasses from the fall and repurpose them in the spring too. I'm very excited to be trying that this spring when my bulbs finally bloom.
Solidago is one of my favorite late summer, early fall fillers, and it's another one of those plants that just grows here like wild on my property, and it's so fantastic to use in the vase. It's also known as goldenrod, and a lot of people confuse goldenrod with something that's blooming at the same time called ragweed that can cause some serious allergies in a person. So you make sure your customer knows the difference between goldenrod, solidago, and ragweed. They are completely different plants. So I actually have about a half acre of solidago growing here naturally. This is a photo of my father actually walking through the field. It's actually one of my favorite places in the fall because you walk through this field and the butterflies and the bees and all of the pollinators are just so extremely active in this area that sometimes I'll just go there and hang out. Solidago is actually used probably more often than you think because florists will use paint and actually paint it a different color, pinks, blues, oranges. It's an extremely versatile filler, and it can actually take a little bit of a frost at the end of the season too, so it'll be there for you when nothing else is.
And then my last one that I've been using the past couple of years, which, if you were gonna have a theme for my fillers, it would be Serina finds garbage in her vegetable farm, but I have been using Veggies and I love it. One of my absolute favorite things to use in late summer, early fall is tomato stems. At this point, there's usually some side branches that have gotten away on me. They have green fruit set. I don't really want them growing. I snip them off. I'll get like a nice 2-foot stem with these like clusters of green. I love slipping those into bouquets. They take up a bunch of space, and they're also, they're fun and they're funky and they look different. I've also used kales and mustards to add greenery, to add some fun into bouquets. But before you use anything veggie-wise out of the garden, I advise doing a vase test. Cut, half a dozen stems of it, stick it in a vase, see how it does. I know when I use the kales, it can make the water kind of murky and muddy. So with those, you want to make sure you're changing the water every day. They last very well for me. The stuff that I've tested, you know, kind of 2 weeks, but you don't want to be mixing them in, getting them, you know, muddying up the water for stuff that maybe doesn't last as long and taking away the vase life from your fun, punchy stuff. You know, you don't want to stick some dirty kale in with your beautiful dahlias that normally get 5 days and now they're only going to get 3 because they don't like sharing the vase with that kale stem. Okay, Nicole and I are still actually beginner flower farmers. With going into my 3rd year here, it's still early days. There's still so many things that I want to try and I just haven't had time. You know, every year you kind of got to build on the knowledge that you have. So there is a huge list that both of us are really excited about for in the future. Outside of this video, Nicole and I have had a few chats about all these fillers that we're so excited about, and we don't have as much firsthand knowledge with it. So this is now the category of stuff that's super exciting, but we don't have as many details. Though Nicole, the stuff that she is focusing on is stuff that she's worked with.
There are a couple of things I'm looking forward to growing for the first time this year, probably a few dozen varieties, but there are 2 things that are really exciting to me, and that is Snow on the Mountain Euphorbia and Mahogany Splendor Hibiscus. These are 2 plants that I worked with last year, but I did not grow them. So a fellow flower farmer of mine who lived about an hour away from me was growing them, and I purchased some of these fillers from her to use in my arrangements and at my bouquet bar on the porch. And these were favorites of the customers. They all wanted to know, what's that? So the Snow on the Mountain Euphorbia is a beautiful variegated plant, green and white, and just absolutely adds that interest in your arrangements. It's something that can't be duplicated with anything else. Now, Euphorbia is one of those plants that also secretes a sap that can be toxic to people, so you have to make sure you warn your customers that if they are to cut the arrangement to keep it fresh, that they need to be aware that the sap that comes out of the bottom of that plant could be dangerous. Fortunately, I do not have a reaction to it, but I make sure all of my customers know, hey, just be careful, that has a sap, just like a milkweed or something like that. I did have a couple customers who opted out after I warned them of the toxin, but you need to leave that up to your customer. Just make sure you're letting them know, hey, there is a warning sign for this plant. So the Mahogany Splendor Hibiscus is actually this gorgeous, well, mahogany. It's like a dark cranberry. It grows so big. My friend had a giant row of it. She only planted 25 plants. Now this is a plant that will ripen and be ready to cut later in the season. You have to wait for the stem to become a little bit woodier when you cut it. And both the Euphorbia and the Hibiscus will wilt if they're not harvested and treated properly following harvest. And so the way that we harvested them was directly into some hot water, and we just let them rest for 24 hours, sometimes up to 2 days, to make sure that they were going to bounce back to life after any wilting occurred.
For this coming year, I'm investing into a lot of cut flower perennials, and lots of them are more focused on being fillers than they are on focal flowers. So I'm beyond excited about Baptisia. This is a plant that I've only heard amazing things. It's drought tolerant, you know, it sounds like it's gonna grow really, really well for me. So I have a patch of it that I'm putting in, and I can't wait to experiment with it. It sounds like you can use it as a filler early on with some flowers on it. You can use it as a filler later on with seed pods on it, and it just produces and produces. So I'm expecting that I'm gonna love it, and I'm gonna be adding to my patch every single year. I'm also putting in a bunch of raspberry canes, which my kids were super excited when they heard because they love raspberries, but no, these are not for fruit. I'm putting the raspberries in for filler. One of the hardest times a year to find filler is early in the season, and raspberries are incredible because they leaf out and are ready to go from the very beginning. So I've invested into a pack of thornless raspberries, be a little bit more pleasant on my hands than the thorny ones that I have here on the farm that I've used now and then, but I love the look of it. Big, full, beautiful. I can't wait for this over the years to fill in and to have an abundant amount. And then I've seen too many pictures online, too many beautiful bouquets, all these amazing, a lot more formal than what I grow, work that so many amazing florists have done. And so I got suckered in. Ian, he's a bad influence. He told me to do it. And so I'm gonna grow some more formal fillers this year that are annuals. I'm going to try some Dusty Miller. It doesn't get very tall, but the look of it, you know, the silver soft coloring, it's very formal, you know, very common in wedding work, which I do not do, but I'm excited to give it a try. I'm also going to be buying some scented geranium. I've grown it before, you know, just as a landscaping plant for myself, and I love the smell of it. I love the look of it. So I'm really excited to see how it will grow for me as a flower filler, if it'll be as productive and as abundant as I want, because I know that I love it. And finally, I have eucalyptus. I got 200 of them. They're this big right now, just my little babies. They're not perennial here. The eucalyptus, you need to start it every year, or I need to figure out a way to drag trees inside my garage to overwinter. But I know people in the area grow it. They get a good harvest off of it in the fall. So I'm excited. I'm excited to give it an experiment, give it a try. It already smells incredible. So I can only imagine how amazing it's gonna be just to have armfuls of it. Well, I'm gonna continue to post the armfuls of beautiful zinnias on all the social media. Well, I'm gonna continue to, you know, always brag first about the beautiful dahlias that we grow, mostly just to show you guys. As a flower farmer, these plants are some of the stuff I get the most excited about. They really do disappear in bouquets. You know, when I put, you know, even my simple, just tiny bouquets together, they always have 50% of these types of plants that I'm talking about. You know, when I do a bouquet and it has 8 zinnias, there is definitely also 8 stems of basil, you know, just filling it in. And even though they disappear without it, you really notice the difference. You notice the loss. So even though I know these plants and these flowers that we're talking about here aren't necessarily the ones that are the most exciting, the value that they add and the importance to, you know, your cut flower garden or your flower farm I can't stress it enough. I'm making a whole video about fillers. That's how important it is. So hopefully this gave you some ideas, right? Because the list is endless. There's so many things that you can use, and this is just scraping the surface. So have fun, enjoy the growing, and I can't wait to show you guys all the new fillers that I'm gonna be using here on the farm. I couldn't even go over all of them, but there's some like really exciting ones. And also remember, make sure if you guys haven't checked out Nicole's channel, you gotta head over there. She's great, she's hilarious. She has tons of videos about flower farming specifically. So click wherever that button is. Go jump over and check out her channel and give her a subscribe. Okay, thanks so much guys, see you next time.